Hi, Levi from InterNACHI again. Today we're going to break down a different style of logo. We're going to look at an emblem logo. Some quick pros and cons for an emblem logo are going to be, the pros are that emblem logos are so involved and contain so many layers that it's really hard to replicate them. So it's good for branding in that it's hard for someone to recreate this unless they hire someone to make it for them. Some of the cons are that emblem logos do not hold up as well to scaling, because in order to compensate for a more detailed image, you usually end up having to make fonts smaller. So for that, you would have to have a website that allowed more room for a logo at the top, and also emblem logos are usually too involved, and the line weights get too small for something like embroidery. So if you want to embroider your logo, an emblem logo is not the route to go. Something better would be like something over here. This is a more simplified concept that's similar, but it's just more clean, and it would be easier for something like embroidery. It's just good to be aware of that stuff before you make a decision on the style of the logo. All right, so let's talk about the image. The same thing that applies to logos that are more simple applies to logos that are more involved. The line weight here for the elk is all consistent, but it's also very heavy. And the reason that it's heavier is because heavier lines scale better. You don't want to have really tiny, thin lines in a logo, because then they can disappear when you scale the logo down. So you have to work with line weights that are a little bit heavier. And the same is true for fonts. Like really thin fonts can also disappear. So you have to be aware of the weight of lines when you're working with a logo design. Another thing I did, and this is like an illustration trick, is if you break a shape, you create depth. So the antlers look like they're sitting above this circle, and the elk grove looks like it's sitting above the elk and the circle. When you do this, you sort of create this illusion of depth, like the things are stacked on top of one another. It makes the logo more dynamic and more interesting. With the colors, I converted this over to grayscale so you can see how they work. Something that was interesting about this is this yellow is actually a pretty dark color. Like color saturation, when a color is really rich, it can fool you into making you think that it's a lighter color than it is. The reason it's good to be aware of this stuff is with something like red on black, a red can look really bright, but when you put it on black, the values are so close together that it can be difficult to read. With this yellow and blue, the blue is saturated and really dark, and the yellow is dark, but it's not enough to compete with this blue. So you still get that sense of like an afternoon sunset. So the values hold up well. But you have to be aware that with an image, the colors you choose are really important in order to create an accurate sense of depth. All right, so I also tilted the font here. This is an italic font, so it actually looks more straight when you tilt it at an angle, but it also creates movement in the design by breaking that straight line a little bit. It gives the design some interest. Another thing that's true about this logo, which is true about things I've shown you before, is that I chose the font because it has shapes that relate well with the image. The same thing that holds with the other logos holds with the emblem logos. The shapes you choose for the image should also work well with the fonts that you choose. And finally, with an emblem logo, it's always good to make sure that your single color version works, because when you're working with like a 5-color design here, some forms of print are going to charge per color, so it's nice to have options that don't cost quite as much to print, but can still reflect your brand. Like you could put this on a navy t-shirt with a yellow logo, but I always make sure that I create versions of the logo that will work across multiple backgrounds, so you can keep your branding consistent. All right, so if you have any questions, you can get a hold of us at marketing.nachi.org, and thanks for your time.